A new clip of Biggie's murder has just surfaced, and it might change everything we thought we knew about his final moment. Remember when Gene Deal recalled Biggie's last words after he was hit?
And the last words I heard Big said, "Just do it."
What happens just seconds after those words, captured in the leaked clip, might finally expose the shooter. I have the details. Let's get into it. The final hours, inside the Peterson Museum party that changed everything.
Puff got in the back seat of him, and I'm telling you, whatever y'all do, don't let him go to sleep. Don't let him go to sleep. I'm in front right here in Big, talking to Big. Y'all don't let him go to sleep. Yo, Big, stay up, Big. Don't let him go to sleep.
According to Gene Deal, Biggie's final moments were already traumatic. But with the release of this last recording, no one was prepared for just how haunting it really is. To understand how deep this moment cuts, you have to rewind to the 90s hip-hop scene. The East Coast-West Coast beef had already claimed one of rap's biggest names when Tupac Shakur got bodied in Vegas on September 7th, 1996. The tension between Death Row Records, run by Suge Knight, and Bad Boy Records, controlled by Sean Diddy Combs, had escalated from musical competition to some real street shit. Biggie had been posted up in Los Angeles for several days, pushing his upcoming album Life After Death, which was about to drop just weeks later. In what would turn out to be his final interview, recorded just days before he got murked, Biggie was speaking on the aftermath of Tupac's murder and his own role in trying to dead the beef that had torn the hip-hop community apart. Them words, spoken with mad hope and determination, would prove to be prophetic as hell. Big understood the weight of his influence and genuinely seemed committed to ending the violence that had already cost the culture too much. But as we bout to discover through the audio evidence and street testimonies that done emerged, forces was already in motion that would ensure his peace mission would never succeed. The night of March 8, 1997 started like any other promotional run. Biggie had spent the day at the Westwood Marquis Hotel, chopping it up with his agent Phil Casey about tour plans, seemingly hyped about the future and the upcoming release of his sophomore joint. That evening, he was scheduled to hit up the Soul Train Music Awards after party at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. But according to Gene Deal, whose testimony provides some of the most crucial evidence we got about that night, red flags was already popping up well before they even bounced to the party. Deal reveals that he caught a chilling phone call from a federal prisoner who warned him that they was coming to get y'all.
Prior to that, I had got a phone call from a guy called Waynesworth Hall. I think it's Waynesworth Hall. His street name was Unique from Mecca Audio. He was a drug kingpin. He said, "Yo, Gene." The girl Dawn called me. He said, "Yo, Unique is on the phone." And I said, "Yeah?" I said, "What's up, Unique?" He said, "Vest up," and the phone hung up.
Unique was calling from the feds, where he was locked up with some of the most dangerous cats in the country. For him to risk using precious phone time to drop such a stark warning suggests he had received some real intel about a planned hit. Deal's growing frustration was impossible to ignore. He tried to warn the higher-ups at Bad Boy, pushing for more security as he sensed the danger building. But his concerns were brushed off, and that lack of action would prove to be tragically costly. Instead of the additional protection Deal requested, they would be rolling to one of Los Angeles' most high-profile events with minimal security, a decision that would have fatal consequences. The Peterson Automotive Museum party was supposed to be a celebration, but according to multiple witnesses whose accounts are now backed by audio evidence, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. There was some serious tension that many attendees could feel but few understood. Sean Bolden, a music industry insider who was present at the party, provides perhaps the most chilling account of what was really going down inside the Peterson Museum that night.
I recognize when people throwing up signs now, and they were doing it a little bit heavier and emphasizing it a lot more once Bad Boy came in, and they were directing it towards Bad Boy. West Coast throwing up signs and looking over there, as some people described that in one of your interviews. I saw a gentleman describe that they were ice grilling at them, and everybody was on their phones. Cellular phones were just becoming popular out there, so people were on their phones making calls, and I feel like it was set up inside that party, that they were like, "Yo, he's here. Yo, he's sitting right there." He just think, "Yo, they here."
This account is particularly significant because Bolden had no personal connection to either Biggie or the Bad Boy crew. He was simply an industry observer who happened to be in the right place to witness what was unfolding. His description of coordinated phone calls and deliberate positioning suggests this wasn't no random act of violence, but rather a carefully orchestrated operation.
He's sitting there with a cane, which looked like a staff. He was in that Versace shirt, so he looked like he was a king in those shades, like he was just sitting there like he was the man, the king, and everything was gravitating towards him. So it almost looked like he was saying, "Y'all can kiss my ass, I'm in the building." When in fact, he had a broken leg and he couldn't move. So he was sitting there because he couldn't walk around the party like Puff was doing.
The tension in the room continued to build. Gene Deal, positioned near Biggie for security, was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with what he was observing. He claims noticing numerous individuals who appeared to be gang members, though they was dressed formally for the upscale event. This contradicted the typical gang attire that would normally make such individuals easily identifiable to street-smart cats like Deal. The party eventually got shut down by the Los Angeles Fire Department due to overcrowding, sometime around 12:30 a.m. on March 9th. As patrons began to exit the building, the real danger was just beginning. What happened in the parking lot and on the streets surrounding the Peterson Museum would change hip-hop history forever. When Deal approached Diddy to share the intel he had received about a planned attack, the response was not just dismissive, but almost aggressively so.
I said, I got some intel that people gonna come and try to kill us. He said, Gene, I don't wanna hear that shit. I said, you don't wanna hear that shit? F what you mean you don't wanna hear that shit? He said, yo, Gene, you ain't gotta go if you don't wanna go.
Here was a professional bodyguard with credible intel from federal prison sources trying to warn his employer about a specific threat to their lives. The dismissal of such a warning suggests either a dangerous level of denial about the risks they was facing or possibly something even more sinister. The fact that 23 people entered the Peterson Museum with the bad boy entourage, but only 11 would bounce when they departed for what would become the final journey suggests that others in the crew was also sensing the danger and chose to distance themselves from what was about to unfold. How Biggie was marked for death. As the Peterson Museum party wound down and the fire department cleared everybody out, the real danger was just beginning to unfold. The process of getting the whips positioned and the entourage organized took much longer than it should have, creating extended exposure time that would prove fatal for the King of New York.
So first we lined up parallel to the door in which they have to come out, right? You follow me?
Yep.
All right, we lined up parallel to where the doors they have to come out. So if they come out right here, the car's right there. They're right there. So then Big is taking his time because you know his fibular bones and his thighs are broken or whatever like that. You know, they fractured or whatever. So it's taking him a long time to come out.
But the delays wasn't just due to Biggie's injury-related mobility issues. According to Deal, Diddy was acting mad erratic, running back and forth, chopping it up with various females, and generally behaving in a way that was completely out of character for someone who typically bounced from events quickly and efficiently.
Puff is running back and forth like, yo, he'll see a girl, he'll go grab a girl. He said, yo, Gene, remember her, she coming to the party tomorrow. I'm like, remember her? What the fuck is you talking about, bro? I never seen him act like this ever, because he don't act like that. Because even in New York City, once Puff get in the car, he'll leave his mama. We gone, we out.
This behavior was so unusual that it caught the attention of multiple witnesses. The extended time spent in the parking area, combined with the highly visible nature of their departure, created exactly the kind of opportunity that shooters would need to position themselves and prepare for a hit. During this extended period in the parking area, Gene Deal noticed something that would prove to be critically important: the appearance of individuals who seemed to be conducting reconnaissance on their position. Deal describes encountering a cat in a blue and white shirt who walked through the area where their vehicles was positioned, apparently surveying the scene.
So this guy in this blue and white shirt comes walking down. So he walks down and he just goes through the garage, you know what I'm saying, while the cars is lined up. I have my gun under my shirt, you know, with my hand, you know, sideways to the trigger like this.
But even more significant was what happened next. Deal describes a second individual, dressed in a blue suit with a white shirt and blue bow tie, who approached their position. This person's behavior and appearance would later prove to match the description of the suspected shooter.
So then next thing you know, less than 5 minutes from that, here this guy come down, he dressed in a blue suit, white shirt, blue bow tie. You understand? He comes and he just, it's a pillow right here. Puff is in the driveway. So the guy, when I come from over the pillow, he stops immediately. And he just looked at me and I looked at him. He didn't say nothing. So I lowered my arm and he could see my gun. He looks me in my eye and turns right back and walks down the street.
The timeline becomes even more suspicious when we examine what happened immediately after this confrontation. Deal describes that within minutes of this encounter, they was finally ready to bounce, and he gave the signal for the convoy to depart. But at the critical moment, when they should have been moving to safety, Deal encountered resistance from his own employer about how to conduct the departure.
Puff said, yo, Gene, what you doing? I said, I'm riding on the side of the car. I'm gonna have my gun out. I'm on the side of the car. At the time, I'm 265, you know what I'm saying? I'm not the street 30, you know what I mean? So I was a little slimmer back then. So he says to me, Gene, if you don't get in this car, you ain't gonna never work for Bad Boy ever again.
Even more disturbing is what happened once Deal complied with this demand. According to his testimony, as soon as he got into the whip, Diddy immediately reclined his seat all the way back, making it nearly impossible for Deal to move quickly or effectively respond to any threat.
As I go to get in the car, this motherfucker reached down and let his seat all the way back. So now I gotta put my legs sideways. I'm like, yo, what the fuck is you doing?
Deal's instincts as a street-smart security professional was telling him to take specific precautions, yet at every turn, he was prevented from implementing proper protective measures. Recognizing the danger they was in, Deal made a desperate attempt to minimize their exposure by instructing the driver to run the next 3 traffic lights. His reasoning was simple: keep the convoy moving and don't give potential attackers time to position themselves for an ambush.
I said, Kenny, run the next 3 lights. Run the next 3 lights, Kenny. Kenny said, for what? I said, motherfucker, run the next 3 lights, Kenny, or I'm gonna drive. Run the next 3 lights. Kenny just took off.
This decision would ultimately save Diddy's life, but it would also create the fatal separation between the lead vehicle and Biggie's SUV that the assassins was waiting for. As the convoy approached the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue, the lead vehicle carrying Diddy ran the red light, but Biggie's vehicle was forced to stop. The precision of what happened next suggests that the attackers had been monitoring the convoy's movement and was positioned at exactly the right location to take advantage of this separation. A dark-colored Chevrolet Impala pulled alongside Biggie's stopped SUV, and the driver opened fire with a 9mm pistol.
Tone, who was behind me, said, yo, somebody in the car pointing a gun at Big and them. I goes to open the door. Fucking next thing you know, you hear it say, pow, pap, 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 pap. Yeah. 5 or 6 cars was like, pap, 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 pap. Right?
The attack itself was swift and professional. 4 shots was fired, with the fatal bullet entering Biggie's right hip and traveling through his liver, heart, and lung. The shooter then immediately fled the scene, demonstrating the kind of planning and escape route preparation that suggests this was the work of experienced hitters. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Gene Deal's testimony concerns what he observed immediately after the shooting. Deal describes pursuing the shooter's vehicle, but being unable to catch up due to a speed governor on their car that prevented them from maintaining high speeds.
Me and Tone hopped back in the car and we try to take after the guy. Tone is trying to floor it, but it had one of those government chips in there. So every time we get close to 100, it go all the way back down. So we can see the guy at the top of the hill.
When Deal returned to the scene, he made an observation that has haunted him for decades. Standing near the Peterson Museum, he encountered DJ Quick, who was on his phone making a statement that suggested foreknowledge of the attack.
So that's when I see DJ Quick come up the block. He was coming from up the block, and he said on his phone, he said, yo, I think they got one of those bad boy niggas. They said they was gonna get him.
Even more disturbing is the evidence suggesting that emergency responders may have been deliberately delayed in reaching the scene. Deal notes that there was ambulances, police, and fire department vehicles positioned just around the corner from where the shooting occurred, yet they didn't respond immediately despite 911 calls being placed. The question of emergency response becomes even more troubling when we examine the route taken to the hospital. According to multiple witnesses, Kenny Story, who was driving Biggie's vehicle, took them to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, which was 30 minutes away, despite there being a hospital just 2 blocks from the Peterson Museum. This delay in getting medical attention may have been the difference between life and death for Biggie.
Kenny took us to a hospital that was 30 minutes away.
Get out of here. 30 minutes away.
30 minutes away.
The decision to bypass closer medical facilities in favor of a hospital that required a 30-minute drive through Los Angeles traffic suggests either incredibly poor judgment or something more sinister. During that final ride to the hospital, Gene Deal was desperately trying to keep Biggie conscious and alive. Deal describes repeatedly telling the occupants of Biggie's vehicle not to let him fall asleep, understanding that losing consciousness could be fatal.
And I said to Puff, whatever y'all do, don't let him go to sleep. Don't let him go to sleep. Whatever y'all do, don't let him go to sleep.
It was during this desperate race to the hospital that Biggie spoke his final words. When Kenny Story promised to get him to the hospital, Biggie's response was simply, just do it. Words that Deal has noted could have been a Nike commercial, but instead became the last thing one of hip-hop's greatest artists would ever say. The cover-up, why Biggie's murder remains unsolved after 27 years. The death of Christopher Wallace at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 1:15 a.m. on March 9, 1997, should have marked the beginning of one of the most intensive murder investigations in Los Angeles history. Instead, what followed was a series of investigative failures, alleged cover-ups, and conflicting theories that have kept this case unsolved for over 2 decades. The evidence suggests that powerful forces were at work to ensure that the truth about Biggie's murder would never fully come to light. Biggie was pronounced dead dead shortly after arriving at the hospital, despite emergency surgery attempts. The cause of death was the single bullet that had traveled through his vital organs, but the circumstances surrounding how he ended up in that position reveal a much more complex story than the official narrative suggests. One of the most troubling aspects of the immediate aftermath was the response of law enforcement at the scene. Gene Deal's testimony reveals that despite there being emergency responders positioned just around the corner from the shooting location, there was a significant delay in their response to the scene. This delay may have cost precious time that could have saved Biggie's life. Even more suspicious was the immediate handling of the crime scene. Rather than locking down the area and conducting a thorough investigation, the LAPD reportedly allowed people to leave the scene without proper questioning. Dwayne "Keffy D" Davis, who was present at the Peterson Museum that night and would later be charged in connection with Tupac's murder, described the scene as chaotic and poorly managed.
By then, LAPD came. They was everywhere. And they started escorting everybody out instead of locking down the crime scene. They should have locked it down.
This failure to properly secure and investigate the crime scene would have far-reaching consequences for the case. Physical evidence may have been lost, witnesses were allowed to leave without giving complete statements, and the chain of custody for crucial evidence was compromised from the very beginning. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the LAPD was facing a case unlike any they had handled before. The intersection of celebrity, gang culture, and the music industry created a web of relationships and motivations that investigators struggled to navigate. The case was initially linked to the unsolved murder of Tupac Shakur, with investigators theorizing that Biggie's death was retaliation for the East Coast rapper's alleged involvement in Tupac's killing. But as retired LAPD detective Greg Kading would later reveal, the investigation was hampered from the beginning by a lack of cooperation from key witnesses and the complex web of gang affiliations that surrounded both Death Row and Bad Boy Records. Kading, who was assigned to reinvestigate the case in 2006, believes he solved both murders, but that political and legal complications prevented prosecutions.
Well, if you were to ask me, I would say it is solved. I would say that it's solved but unprosecuted.
According to Kading's investigation, the murder was orchestrated by Suge Knight from inside county jail, using an intermediary to coordinate with the actual shooter. The alleged shooter was Wardell Poochie Faust, a member of the mob Piru Bloods who had connections to Death Row Records.
The time that Biggie Smalls was killed, Suge Knight was in the county jail. So in order for him to communicate with somebody on the street, he had to go through an intermediary, which was this female who was visiting him in jail.
Kading's investigation revealed that this woman, whose identity has been protected, admitted to facilitating the murder plot during interviews with the LAPD and FBI in 2009. She allegedly received immunity for her cooperation, but by the time the investigation reached this point, the alleged shooter was already dead.
Suge makes the arrangement for that money to get transferred. She pays Poochie, and he goes and sets himself up at the Peterson Auto Museum and shoots and kills Biggie.
But Kading's theory, while compelling, is just one of several that have emerged over the years. Other investigations have pointed to corrupt LAPD officers as being involved in the murder, with some suggesting that the killing was carried out by or with the assistance of law enforcement officials who had connections to Death Row Records. The corruption angle gained credibility due to the LAPD's Rampart scandal, which was unfolding around the same time as Biggie's murder. Officers like David Mack and Rafael Perez, who were later convicted of various crimes, were alleged to have had connections to Death Row Records and may have been involved in the murder plot. Keffy D, who was present at the Peterson Museum the night of the murder, has suggested that he believes LAPD officers or individuals connected to the department were involved in Biggie's killing.
Do I think LAPD killed? I don't think it was, I think one of the LAPD gangsters killed, you know what I'm saying? Killed Big. I know, not the, the dude that was, he was the LAPD and a gangster too, yeah. That's what I feel. Rafael Perez even kind of broke it down, you know what I'm saying?
Perhaps even more disturbing are the allegations that have emerged about potential involvement from within the Bad Boy Records organization itself. Deal has described how Diddy's behavior that night was completely out of character, suggesting that the extended delays in exposure time may not have been accidental. The dismissal of security warnings, the limitation of protective measures, and the suspicious timing of various events all point to possible inside knowledge of the planned attack. Even more explosive are recent allegations that have surfaced, suggesting Diddy may have had advanced knowledge of threats against Biggie, or may have been involved in orchestrating events that led to his death. The financial motivations for such a betrayal become clearer when we examine the contractual relationships within Bad Boy Records. Gene Deal revealed that he he had read Biggie's contract and discovered that the rapper was being financially exploited, with Diddy maintaining control over publishing and marketing rights that should have belonged to the artist.
So it's saying, because at the end of the contract, Big was begging for his, well, he was asking for his publishing and his marketing back, and Puff was saying in the contract, we'll revisit that at a later date. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just reading this story. I got 6 hours on this plane. I'm gonna go through whatever's in this briefcase.
Biggie was reportedly planning to leave Bad Boy Records and start his own label, taking several other artists with him. This would have represented a massive financial loss for Diddy and Bad Boy Records, potentially providing a motive for preventing Biggie from leaving the label.
He's about to finish up with the last album, and then he's getting $60-some million with him, with Lil' Kim, with all these other guys that is gonna start his own thing.
The timing of Biggie's death, just weeks before the release of Life After Death, and at a point when he was reportedly planning to leave Bad Boy Records, raises troubling questions about who benefited most from his murder. The album became one of the best-selling rap albums of all time, generating millions in revenue that would have gone to Biggie had he lived to renegotiate his contract. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.